Hi, Chuck Bashaw, teaching the core. Today I'm going to talk about something that I do in Core 110, Concepts of Self. It's a working title, The First Day with David Linden, an exercise in critical reading and thinking, and an introduction to some widely held ideas. So, Core 110, Concepts of Self. David Linden, accidental line. So it's the third day of class, second week of the semester, and the first day we're going to work with David Linden, and I've assigned them a big chunk of reading from the book, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I've done some preparatory work that I've got to give you a basic idea of. In the first week, I had them explain to me why they have to take core classes, and I had them explain to me why they had to take this particular core class, which is an exploration of the nature of the self. And then at the end of the first week, I do this exercise with them that has two main purposes. The first is to show them that there's no one place you can stand where you can see all sides of something. So it's an exercise in perspective, which sets up the fact that we're going to look at the self from a variety of different angles. Lesson about perspective. And then it also serves the function of warning them about falling into false binaries. Black and white, yes, no. Most things are shades of gray. So that's in the background. So they come in, I give them the plan for the day, which is to talk about Linden as text, and to talk about Linden's thesis, and the plan for the week. Next class, we're going to talk about we're going to dig more deeply into what I've asked them to read. And what I've asked them to read for this week is the prologue and chapters 1 through 3. It's a big chunk of reading. And this is college. So, we start with Linden as text. And that's going to occupy us today. Linden as text and Linden's thesis. So, I start off with the question, did you like what you read? Now, of course, some of them have read it, hopefully most of them. Most of them have at least skimmed it. And some of them have maybe looked at it. One or two haven't even bothered to buy the book. I've hammered on last week the fact that they need to bring the book, and I can see that most of them have the book with them, so we're in pretty good shape. Especially since we're going to be talking more about the book today than about what's actually in it. So, first question is, did you like it? A lot of people don't like this question because they think it's a kind of a silly question. I mean, colleagues. It's not about whether you like something or not, it's about your judgment of its value. My belief is that question, did you like it, is shorthand for how good did you think it was. So, start the question with, well, did you like it? This gives me the opportunity, among other things, to find out who are the science nerds, who are the science phobes, and where everybody lies. So there are a few students who are really excited about it, and they start talking about why. Then eventually we get to the students who, you have to tease it out of them, but who will finally admit that reading it was one of the most painful experiences of their life, and they're not sure if they got anything at all out of it. So then we talk a bit about Linden's style. And sooner or later, one of them will, in one way or another, say something to the effect of, he sounds like a high school chemistry teacher who's trying to be funny but really isn't very good at it. One of those science geeks who they actually find funny is things that abstract mathematics and don't get what the rest of us find amusing. One student a year or two ago said something to the effect of, he sounds like a dad who's trying to be funny with his teenagers and failing at it. Okay. Well, why is Linden doing that? I asked them. And eventually, I worked them around to the question, or to the understanding, that Linden is trying to tell us some things about the brain and about what it means to be human, and he's trying to convince us. And he's taking a particular strategy to go about doing that. So at this point, I asked them, here I'm heavily dependent on the science nerds, do you find it strange that we're talking about David Linden's rhetorical strategies. You know, does that belong in science? And at this point, that segues into a talk about objectivity and subjectivity and plausibility and probability and certainty. And there's actually another one of these talks that gives that, so I won't really say much about that right now. But the basic idea is that once we leave the realm of abstract mathematics, most things are about opinion. Opinions based on fact. This is my interpretation of the data, and so on and so forth. So, David Linden is going to try to convince us of certain things about how the brain works and what that means for what it means to be human. Which puts us in an awkward position. I'm not a biologist, and I ask them. I say to them, I suspect none of you. You know, you're here at Champlain. We don't have a biology major. Some of you took all of you took some high school science classes. I've got some psychology majors in the class probably, but most of us. How do we know that David Linden isn't making all this stuff up? How do we know that we can buy any of this stuff? What do we do? So they sit there for a while, and I say, "Well, let's look at the book." And after a painful few minutes or so, someone will point out that on the back of the book, they have a different version of the text than we do, but it still has something about Linden, that David Linden teaches neuroscience at Johns Hopkins University. Okay, well, so we've all heard of Johns Hopkins University. So if he teaches neuroscience there, that suggests that he knows something about the subject. Okay. We discover on the back of the book that various other supposed scientists have said good things about the book. It's won an award. Occasionally, a bright student, if they don't, I'll point it out for them, that the book was published by the Belknap Press of Harvard University. And so I asked them, what do you suppose it means to have a book published, by Harvard? And either they get it or I feed it to them. It means that Linden submitted this book to a group of experts in the field who read it and said, okay, yeah, this should be published. That doesn't mean they agree with everything he said in it, but it means that they think the book is at least worth taking seriously. Okay, so we've got all these things that tell us that other people who study these kinds of things think that Linden at least has a clue what he's talking about. Okay. This leads into an interesting digression about the nature of expertise and two fallacies that come along with that. The first is that just because David Linden is an expert doesn't mean that everything he says on something is necessarily true. What it means is that he is qualified to have an expert opinion. This does not mean that someone who's not a biologist can't have opinions about this matter. Or on the one hand, it makes sense that you go to your plumber with a question about plumbing, and you go to your doctor with a question about your heart. You can't rule out everything your plumber says about your heart, and you can't rule out everything your doctor says about your plumbing. Nonetheless, expertise lends a certain credence to what he's going to say. But at the end of the day, we're still stuck with trying to figure out what to do with the book. So, this leads us to a dilemma. And this is a dilemma that we face pretty much continuously in our lives. Pretty much throughout our lives, people are making claims at us. Believe this, don't believe that. Buy this, don't buy that. Do this, don't do that. Vote for me, not her, etc., etc., etc. How do you know? In many situations, we're confronted with having to make these decisions. Most situations, we're confronted with having to make decisions about claims that people are making without any particular expertise in the subject. It's kind of what it means to be human. There are three questions we always need to ask. What are the claims? What is the evidence? And am I convinced? Okay. So, it starts with understanding the claims. So, let's take a look at what Linden's claiming. So, we turn to the thesis of Linden's text. Okay. So, I asked him, what is a thesis? And eventually we get that conversation done. Okay. So, in a book like this, where would you expect to find the thesis? And maybe it's a little painful, but eventually they say, well, somewhere near the beginning. And this gives us an opportunity to talk about one of the reasons that we use this book in Core 110, the fact that it is an excellent example of academic writing. David Linden, in this book, at the very beginning, tells you what the book is about. In each chapter, he tells you what the chapter is about, then he provides some evidence, then in the chapter, he tells you the big ideas again. So it's pretty formulaic. Big ideas, evidence, big ideas. So, you look for the thesis near the beginning of the book. Okay. So I put them in groups of two, and have them look for evidence in the text of Linden's thesis. While they're doing that, I pace around and eavesdrop, so that later I can say, I heard this group say, and so on and so forth. And I occasionally drop a hint. One of the big hints I drop is that there are two major claims to Linden's thesis in this book. Okay. So I let them chew on it for a while, and as I'm walking around, eavesdropping and looking at my watch, it's sort of a balance between time and time left, and when it seems like they've pretty much gotten there. Eventually, pull them back together as a group and say, oh, okay, so tell me what you got. What's Linden's thesis? And they start putting bits and pieces of it out on there, and I'll prompt them by saying, well, I heard this group saying, and that group saying. But they still haven't quite formulated it. You know what I'm saying? And I've had them show me in the text and read passages from the prologue in chapter 1 where they found evidence of what Linden's thesis is. And I'll say to them, well, so you found a lot of information about the book on the back cover. What about the title? And I tell them the title of the book pretty much gives away David Linden's two major claims. So let's look at the title. And we read the title and we deconstruct it. It takes quite a time. But the title of Linden's book is The Accidental Mind, How Brain Evolution Has Given Us Love, Memory, Dreams, and God. And eventually, I tease out the two major claims of Linden's thesis from them. One, the brain was not designed, was not created. It is the way it is because it evolved to be that way over time. That's the first claim. And the second claim, the way the brain works tells us a great deal about who we are and why we do what we do. Having gotten there, these are the two major claims. The next question is, okay, so are we convinced? And that, of course, leads to a discussion of the evidence we haven't done yet. So I say, okay, that's pretty much what we got for today. Next time, we'll come back and we'll dig into the evidence. This gives those who have not yet done too much wrestling with it a chance to wrestle with it. Along the way, there's also been some discussion about how to read a text like this that gets into the question of close reading versus skimming. And I tell them that as college students, they're really going to need to learn how to skim effectively because they're going to be asked to read a lot of stuff. And the way skimming effectively works is counting upon, first of all, an author to write in a useful way, and then knowing that the big ideas are coming at the front and the middle, the evidence is going to come in the middle, and the big ideas again at the end. You read very closely at the beginning of chapters until you're pretty sure you've got a handle on what the author's saying. Then you can start jumping ahead. And as long as you don't encounter anything that contradicts what you already thought you understood, you can keep going. If you come to something that doesn't fit with what you read before, you have to go back and figure out how that fits in. But that's close reading and skimming. So I send them away to dig back into Linden. They'll come back the next time and we'll wrestle with his evidence. And that's what I got.